The message arrived at 0300 hours, Earth Standard Time. It did not come through diplomatic channels. It did not come with a polite request for a meeting, or a carefully worded letter passed between ambassadors. It came through every human communication frequency at once: military bands, civilian networks, emergency channels, deep space relay stations, colony outposts on the edge of known space. Every screen, every speaker, every receiver that humanity owned lit up at the same moment with the same signal. The Vithara Collective wanted to make sure no one missed it. High Admiral Soroth Vel appeared on every screen. He was tall, even by Vithara standards. His skin was the pale gray blue of deep ocean water. His eyes were gold and expressionless, and he wore the black and red uniform of the Collective Supreme War Command. He stood with his hands behind his back in the center of what appeared to be a massive council chamber. Behind him, 11 banners hung from the ceiling, one for each civilization that made up the Vithara Collective. 11 species, 11 fleets, one unified military machine that had never in 400 years lost a single war. He looked into the camera the way a man looks at something small and unimportant. "People of the human union," he said, in flawless translated English, "this message is both simple and final. The territories you call the Outer Reach, all colony systems beyond the Kereth Nebula, are claimed by the Vithara Collective, effective immediately. You will remove all military and civilian presence from those systems within 72 standard hours. You will not resist, you will not negotiate, you will comply." He paused, not for effect, simply because he was done. "If you do not comply, the Collective will remove you, not just from the Outer Reach. We will dismantle every human colony, every station, every fleet, and every settlement until nothing remains of your presence beyond your home system. We have done this before. We will not enjoy doing it again, but we will not hesitate." The transmission ended. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence across the entire human communication grid. Then, slowly, the noise began. News networks erupted. Emergency alerts fired across colony systems. On Earth, in the deep underground halls of the Human Union's Central Command, generals and politicians and scientists stared at screens replaying the message over and over, as if watching it again might somehow change what it said. It did not change. General Yara Solis was the first to speak in the emergency session. She was a short woman with cropped gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too many bad days to panic over one more. She stood at the head of the long black table, where 40 of humanity's most senior leaders had gathered. Some in person, most as holograms flickering in from off-world locations. "They're not wrong about the numbers," she said plainly. "Their fleet strength is approximately 40 times ours in the Outer Reach. Their combined military tonnage across all 11 member civilizations exceeds our total naval capacity by a factor of 12. On paper, this is not a fight we can win." The room was very quiet. "On paper," she repeated, and she sat down. The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. It covered every option: surrender and negotiation, partial withdrawal, stalling for time, requests for mediation from neutral alien civilizations. Every path was examined, and every path had the same problem. The Vithara had not asked for a conversation. They had issued an order. And every piece of intelligence humanity's spy networks had gathered in the past 2 years pointed to the same ugly truth. The Collective had been preparing for this moment for a long time. They were not bluffing. They were not posturing. They were ready. By hour 5, Grand Admiral Alara Voss had said almost nothing. She sat near the end of the table, with a cup of cold coffee she had not touched, and a small datapad she had been reading quietly, while everyone else argued. She was not the oldest person in the room, but she carried herself like someone who had already decided something, and was simply waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. When the debate finally exhausted itself, someone turned to her. "Admiral Voss, you've been quiet." She looked up from the data pad. "I've been thinking," she said. And she set the pad down on the table. "They expect us to either surrender or send our fleet. They've modeled both scenarios. They know our fleet deployments. They know our response times. They know how long it takes us to mobilize, how far our ships can jump, and roughly how many guns we can point at them. Their intelligence on our military is good." She paused. "But intelligence is only as useful as your assumptions. And their assumption is that we think the way they think. Meaning they believe that when a civilization is outgunned, it either folds or charges. Those are the two options every civilization in the collective has ever chosen." She picked up her coffee, looked at it, and put it back down. "We're not going to do either." The room waited. "We're going to send a response," she said. "It will arrive before their deadline, and it will answer every question they have about what kind of species we are." One of the senior diplomats leaned forward. "How many ships?" Voss looked at him for a moment. "One," she said. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Before it had been the silence of fear. This was the silence of people trying to decide whether the most senior military mind in human history had just lost her mind, or if they were missing something important. Several people started talking at once. Voss raised one hand, and they stopped. "I'm not finished," she said quietly. "We are not sending one ship because it is all we have. We are not sending one ship as a gesture or a bluff. We are sending one ship because that is the most precise and honest answer we can give them. They asked us what we are. We are going to show them." She finally picked up her coffee and took a long sip. "The Pale Sovereign launches in 4 hours. Commander Holt will lead the mission. He has his orders." She stood up, and for a moment she looked at every face in the room. "Let me be very clear about one thing," she said. "We are not doing this because we are brave. We are doing this because we have been preparing for a conversation like this one for a very long time. The Vethara built an empire. We built something else." She picked up her data pad and walked toward the door. "They'll understand the difference soon enough." She left the room. At exactly 0900 hours, the Human Union's official response to the Vethara Collective was transmitted on the same frequencies the Collective had used. It was 7 words long. "Acknowledged. Our response is already on its way." In the Grand Council chamber, High Admiral Soreth Vel read the message twice. Then he turned to his intelligence officers and told them to find the incoming human fleet. He expected hundreds of ships. He expected a wall of metal and firepower crossing the outer sensor nets like a wave. His intelligence officers searched for 3 hours. They found one contact, one ship, moving faster than anything their sensors had ever tracked, already inside the outer marker, already past the point where it should have been detected, already, impossibly, almost there. Soreth Vel stared at the single blip on the sensor display for a long moment. "One ship," his aide said softly, as if saying it out loud might help it make sense. Soreth Vel said nothing, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, something moved behind his gold eyes that had not been there before. It was not quite fear. It was the feeling that comes just before fear, when the world stops making sense and your mind has not yet caught up to what your instincts already know. Something was very wrong with his assumptions. The Vethara sensor operator's name was Dren Sa, and he had been working the night watch for 6 years without ever seeing anything that surprised him. That changed at 0412 hours. He was running a routine sweep of the outer perimeter when the contact appeared, not on the far edge of the sensor net, not at the expected entry corridor where ships coming from human space would logically drop out of faster-than-light travel. The contact appeared inside the perimeter, deep inside, 40,000 kilometers from the forward command platform, which was the most heavily defended structure in the entire battle group. 200 Vethara warships surrounded that platform. Layers of automated defense grids, sensor nets calibrated to detect a vessel the size of a small shuttle at a range of 500,000 kilometers. Nothing should have been able to get that close without being seen. Drensaw checked his instruments. He ran a diagnostic. He checked again. The contact was still there, solid and clear and completely real, sitting in space like it had always been there, and was simply waiting for someone to notice. He pressed the alert. Within 40 seconds, every senior officer in the battle group was awake. Within 2 minutes, High Admiral Sorath Vel was standing on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the same display Dren Sa had been staring at, wearing the same expression of careful, controlled disbelief. One vessel, his tactical officer confirmed. Configuration unknown. No match in any collective database. Length approximately 800 meters. Running no standard transponder. No active weapon signatures. No communications on any standard frequency. A pause. It is not moving. Sorath Vel studied the display. The ship, the single lone human ship, sat in the middle of his battle group, like a stone dropped into still water. It had emerged from faster-than-light travel, so deep inside the perimeter that the mathematics of it were almost insulting. FTL jumps of that precision required calculation accuracy that the collective's own best navigators could not reliably achieve. You did not jump inside a defended perimeter by accident. You did not jump to within 40,000 kilometers of a target without knowing exactly what you were doing and being very, very confident in the outcome. Bring all forward batteries to targeting lock, Sorath Vel said. His voice was steady. I want every ship in the group oriented toward that contact within the next 3 minutes, and open a channel. Both orders were carried out simultaneously. The human vessel appeared on the main screen a moment later, captured by long-range visual sensors. It was long and dark, almost featureless along its hull, shaped like something between a blade and a splinter. There were no visible gun ports, no obvious weapon arrays, no external structures that Vethara engineers could immediately identify as offensive systems. It looked, in a strange way, almost plain. Undecorated. It carried no markings on its hull except for a name, printed in clean white letters along the forward section. UEHV Pale Sovereign. Sorath Vel opened the channel. For a moment there was nothing. Then the screen shifted, and a face appeared. Human, male, younger than Sorath Vel had expected. Commander Davin Holt looked like someone who had slept well and eaten breakfast and had nowhere else he needed to be. He had calm dark eyes and a relaxed posture, and the faint expression of someone who finds a situation mildly interesting rather than frightening. Behind him, the bridge of the Pale Sovereign was quiet and orderly, crew members moving at their stations without urgency. We received your message. Sorath Vel looked at him for a moment. You are inside a secured military perimeter. You are surrounded by 200 warships with full targeting locks on your vessel. You are in violation of collective space. Identify your authority and explain your presence. Commander Davin Holt, United Earth Heavy Vessel Pale Sovereign, operating under direct orders from Grand Admiral Ilara Voss. Holt said it simply, without any particular ceremony. We're here because you asked a question. The question was whether humanity would comply with your ultimatum. Grand Admiral Voss felt the clearest answer was a demonstration rather than a written response. A demonstration, Sorath Vel repeated. Yes, sir. You are one ship. Yes, sir. Sorath Vel studied the young commander on the screen. He had faced frightened enemies before. He had faced angry ones, desperate ones, proud ones who refused to accept reality until the very end. He had learned to read the emotional state of an opponent the way a navigator reads weather. as useful information that told you what was coming next. Holt did not look frightened. He did not look angry, or desperate, or falsely brave in the way that people look when they are performing courage they do not actually feel. He looked, more than anything, patient. The way someone looks when they are waiting for you to understand something that they already understand completely. That, more than anything else, made Sorath uncomfortable. "Where is the rest of your fleet?" he asked. Holt glanced off to his left for just a moment. Not nervously, almost thoughtfully, the way someone glances away when deciding how to phrase something accurately. Then he looked back. "This is the fleet, sir," he said. The bridge behind Sorath was very quiet. "You are telling me," Sorath said slowly, "that humanity's response to a military ultimatum from the Vethera Collective, a coalition of 11 civilizations, with a combined fleet strength of over 4,000 warships, is one vessel, 800 meters, one crew." "I'm telling you that this is what we chose to send," Holt said. "There's a difference." Sorath decided he had heard enough. Whatever game the humans were playing, whether this was a distraction, a delay, a diplomatic maneuver designed to buy time for their real fleet to mobilize, it did not matter. The ship was inside his perimeter. It was surrounded. And allowing it to simply sit there while its commander made calm, strange statements was not something he was willing to do. "Target the vessel," he said quietly to his tactical officer. "All batteries, full power. Fire on my mark." His tactical officer hesitated for just a fraction of a second. The hesitation of someone who has run the numbers and is not entirely sure about them, and then confirmed the order. 200 ships aligned their weapons on the Pale Sovereign. Sorath looked at Holt one more time. Holt had not moved. He had not reacted to the targeting locks with any visible alarm. He was simply watching, with that same patient expression, as if he were observing something he had already seen play out in his mind, and was now watching confirm itself in reality. "Any final communication?" Sorath asked. It was a formality. He did not expect anything useful. Holt tilted his head very slightly. "Yes, actually," he said. "I'd recommend your science teams record everything that happens next. You'll want the data." A brief pause. "Also, and I want to be clear about this, we are not going to fire first. Everything you're about to see is a response, not an attack. Please keep that in mind when you're writing your report." Sorath marked the statement as either the most confident thing he had ever heard, or the most delusional. He had not yet decided which. "Fire," he said. 200 ships fired at once. The Pale Sovereign did not move. The first barrage hit it like a wall. Concentrated directed energy weapons, kinetic rounds, enough raw firepower to crack open a small moon. The impact was massive. The light from the detonations bloomed across the sensor displays like a small star being born. And when the light cleared, the Pale Sovereign was still there. Dren saw, back at his sensor station, stared at his display with very wide eyes. The hull of the human ship was intact, not partially intact, not damaged and holding, completely, perfectly intact. And his sensors were showing him something else, something that made his hands go very still on his console. The energy readings around the human vessel were changing, growing, adapting, as if the ship had taken the energy from 200 weapons and was doing something with it, learning from it. He opened his mouth to report this to the Admiral. Before he could speak, the Pale Sovereign moved for the first time since it had arrived. Not away, not toward the edge of the perimeter, toward escape, toward them. Dren had been a sensor operator for 6 years, and he had always been proud of staying calm under pressure. He was not calm right now. His display was showing him things that did not make sense. Not in the way that broken equipment stops making sense, but in the way that reality stops making sense when it decides to stop following the rules you believed in. The Pale Sovereign had taken the full combined fire of 200 warships, and it had not broken, had not cracked, had not even slowed down. The energy readings around its hull were still climbing, still shifting, still doing something that his training had no name for. He typed out a report with steady hands, because that was his job. His voice was less steady when he read it aloud. Admiral, the target shielding appears to be adaptive. Each volley we fire, the barrier adjusts. The second barrage is showing 30% less penetration than the first. The third is showing 60% less. He paused. He checked the numbers again because the numbers could not be right. They were right. At current rate of adaptation, our weapons will be effectively useless against that hull within 4 more firing cycles. The bridge was silent in the way that a room goes silent when everyone hears something they were not prepared to hear. Sorath Vel stood very still. "Continue firing," he said. They continued firing. Dren Sa watched his display. The second prediction was worse than the first. By the 6th volley, the energy readings from impact were barely registering. The Pale Sovereign was moving through the battle group now. Not charging, not attacking, just moving. Drifting through the formation, the way a large, unbothered animal drifts through smaller creatures that scatter around it. It turned slowly, almost lazily. And for the first time Dren Sa noticed something about the way it was moving. It was not trying to leave. It was circling. Slowly, methodically, as if it was looking at each ship in the group in turn, measuring them, deciding something. Then it fired for the first time. Dren Sa did not see a beam or a projectile or anything he could point to and name. What his sensors detected was a pulse, a single wide, low-frequency burst that rolled outward from the Sovereign like a ripple in water. It passed through 14 ships on the left flank of the formation, and his board lit up with 14 simultaneous damage reports. No hull breaches, no fires, no casualties. Every engine on all 14 ships went dark at exactly the same moment. The ships were not destroyed. They were not even badly damaged. Parked in space, like toys whose batteries had been removed. All 14 of them drifting in slow, powerless silence, while their crews worked frantically to understand what had just happened to them. Dren Sa stared at the display. 14 ships, 1 pulse, engines only, nothing else touched. Whatever that weapon was, it knew exactly what it was aiming for. On the far side of the battle group, Weapons Master Kael Dor had been firing his guns continuously for 11 minutes, and was beginning to feel something he did not like feeling in the middle of a battle. He was feeling foolish. He had 40 years of experience behind him. He had served in 3 wars and 17 major engagements, and he had never once questioned the fundamental logic that had guided every one of them. That superior firepower, applied consistently and in sufficient quantity, would break any enemy. It was not a philosophy. It was physics. It was simple truth. The Pale Sovereign was making him question simple truth. In between firing cycles, he had been watching the human ship move, and he had noticed something that had taken him too long to notice. Something that a younger, less confident version of himself might have caught sooner. The Sovereign had not taken a single evasive action since the battle began. It had not dodged. It had not shifted its position to reduce its profile. It had flown in smooth, predictable lines through the center of the formation, as if the incoming fire was not something to avoid, but something to collect. He pulled up his firing logs and looked at them differently. Not at what he had hit, but at the angles, the positions, the timing. The human ship had spent the first 6 minutes flying a specific pattern, a slow, wide curve that took it past every ship in the formation, at a range of between 15 and 30,000 kilometers. He had thought it was maneuvering for position. He understood now that it was not. It was building a map. It had been flying past each ship at close range to scan them, learning their weapon frequencies, their shield configurations, their engine signatures. all while letting itself be fired upon so that its adaptive shielding could catalog and neutralize every type of weapon in the battle group. It had not been fighting them. It had been studying them. Kaldor set his firing controls to standby and sat back in his chair for a long moment. He had 40 years of experience, and in all of that time, he had never felt outplayed. He felt outplayed now, not by greater firepower, not by superior numbers, but by a level of calm, methodical preparation that made everything he was doing feel like exactly what it was. Noise. He reached out and pressed the standby button and stared at the pale sovereign on his screen, moving through the battle group like it owned the space it was moving through. And he thought about what that meant, not for the battle, for everything else. Ambassador Virasol had not been on the command platform when the battle started. She had been in her private quarters reviewing trade documents from the Collective's eastern territories, and she had come to the bridge because the noise and movement had made it impossible to concentrate. She was a diplomat, the Collective's senior representative, assigned to this battle group as an observer for the post-surrender transition. They had expected there to be paperwork to process within 48 hours of the ultimatum. Surrender terms, colony transfer documents. The quiet, orderly business of one civilization accepting the reality of another civilization's power. She stood at the back of the bridge now and watched the display screens with different eyes than everyone else in the room. While the officers watched weapon impacts and shield readings and engine signatures, Virasol found herself pulling up a different kind of data on her personal tablet. She opened the Collective's intelligence files on human history, the ones compiled over the past 30 years as humanity had expanded outward and attracted more attention from the wider galaxy. She started reading. She read about the wars humanity had fought with itself, centuries of them, brutal and relentless, on a single planet with no outside help, no alien guidance, no advanced technology handed to them by a more developed civilization. She read about the near-extinction events, the plagues, the environmental collapses, the resource wars, and about how each time, somehow, some part of humanity had survived and rebuilt. She read about the moment humanity had first achieved faster-than-light travel, and the speed at which they had then expanded, colonizing systems that other spacefaring civilizations had assessed and abandoned as too difficult, too dangerous, too resource-intensive to be worth the effort. Humans had looked at those same systems and seen possibility. She read for 20 minutes while the battle played out on the screens around her. At some point, she stopped noticing the battle entirely. When she finally looked up, there were now 31 ships sitting dark and powerless in the formation, all disabled with the same quiet precision. Engines gone, life support untouched, crews alive and unharmed. The Pale Sovereign had not destroyed a single vessel. It had not killed a single crew member. Virasol looked at the human ship on the screen. Then she looked back at her tablet. Then she did something that nobody on the bridge noticed because they were all too busy being afraid. She began drafting a report, not to the military command, but to the Collective's Grand Council, marked urgent, marked highest priority. The subject line read, "We have made an error in our assessment of this species. I recommend immediate suspension of all military action pending full diplomatic review." This is not a request. She sent it before anyone could tell her not to. On her screen, the Pale Sovereign had stopped moving. It sat in the center of the battle group, 31 ships dark around it, 169 more still active, but no longer firing, and it simply held position, waiting, as if it had made its point and was now giving everyone else time to understand it. Virasol thought that was either the most arrogant thing she had ever seen, or the most patient. She was beginning to think it was both. The battle group had stopped firing 20 minutes ago. Not because Sorafel had ordered them to stop. He had not given that order. His officers had simply stopped firing on their own, one by one, battery by battery, because they had all arrived at the same quiet conclusion that Kale Dor had arrived at, that firing was pointless. And continuing to do something pointless in front of an enemy who was watching you do it was worse than stopping. It was embarrassing. And Vithara officers did not like to be embarrassed. 63 ships were now dark and drifting in the formation. 63 engines killed cleanly and precisely. 63 crews alive and unharmed, sitting in powered-down vessels like pieces on a game board that had been gently set aside. The Pale Sovereign had done it without rushing, without anger. It had moved through the formation at a steady pace, firing its strange pulsing weapon when it chose to, and holding back when it chose to, as if it were following a plan that had been written long before this battle began. Now it was still again, waiting. Soroth Vel stood at the center of his bridge and looked at the display, and did something he had not done in a very long time. He thought carefully before he spoke. Then he said quietly, "Open a private channel to the human vessel. No recording, no broadcast, just the channel." His communications officer hesitated. "Admiral, protocol requires—" "I know what protocol requires," Soroth Vel said. "Open the channel." The channel opened. Holt appeared on screen. He looked exactly as he had looked at the beginning, calm, patient, unhurried. There was a cup of something warm in his hand now. He took a small sip before he spoke. "Admiral," he said. "Commander," Soroth Vel said. "I want to speak plainly," Holt said. "I'd appreciate that." Soroth Vel looked at the young man on the screen for a moment. He had commanded fleets for 30 years. He had negotiated surrenders, accepted them, and in 2 difficult cases, refused them. He knew how these conversations were supposed to go. He knew the shape of them, the careful posturing, the veiled threats, the slow movement toward terms that both sides could accept without losing too much face. He had done it many times. He did not think that was what this conversation was going to be. He was not entirely sure what this conversation was going to be. That uncertainty was deeply unfamiliar to him, and he did not enjoy it. "What is that ship?" he asked. Holt set down his cup. "The Pale Sovereign is a Sovereign-class deep engagement vessel, 7th of her class. She carries a crew of 212, an adaptive barrier system that learns and recalibrates against incoming energy signatures, a wide-pulse disruption weapon designed to selectively disable specific ship systems without causing casualties, and a full suite of long-range sensors capable of mapping an entire fleet's tactical configuration within approximately 8 minutes of arrival." He said all of it simply, like he was reading off a list of groceries. "She is not our most advanced ship. She is not our largest. She is not our fastest." Soroth Vel was quiet for a moment. "She is the 7th of her class," he said. "Where are the other 6? Holt looked at him steadily. "They are currently positioned at 6 Vethera home systems. They have been in position for 9 days. The bridge behind Soroth Vel was so quiet that the hum of the ship's systems was the only sound. 9 days, Soroth Vel repeated. "We received intelligence about the collective's military buildup 26 months ago," Holt said. "Grand Admiral Voss began planning a response at that time. The 6 vessels were deployed before your ultimatum was broadcast. Before you sent the message, we had already answered it." A brief pause. "We didn't send 1 ship because it was all we had, Admiral. We sent 1 ship because we wanted to give you the chance to understand the answer without paying the full cost of learning it the hard way." Soroth Vel absorbed this slowly. He was a careful man, and he did not like to react to information before he had fully understood it. But some information lands differently than other information, and this kind landed the way heavy things land when they fall from a great height, with a weight and a finality that you feel before you can think about it. 26 months. They had known for 26 months. While the collective had been preparing its ultimatum in secret, humanity had already been preparing its response. While Soroth Vel had been reviewing his battle plans and his fleet deployments and his casualty projections, 6 human ships had been drifting silently through the darkness near Vithara home planets, unseen and undetected, waiting. "You could have struck first," he said. "It was not quite a question." "Yes," Holt said. "You could have ended this before it started." "Yes. Why didn't you?" Holt was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who does not have an answer, but the quiet of someone choosing the right words for an answer they have thought about deeply. "Because we have been where you are," he said. "Not your civilization specifically, but we know what it feels like to be the smaller power facing something larger. We spent most of our history being afraid of things bigger than us. Other nations, other weapons, other ideas. We almost destroyed ourselves more times than I can count. Not because we lack strength, but because we let fear make our decisions for us." He picked up his cup again. "We don't want to rule the collective, Admiral. We don't want your territory. We don't want a war. We want to be left alone to exist. That is all we have ever wanted. But we learned a long time ago that wanting peace and being willing to do nothing are 2 very different things." He was looking at the young commander on the screen, and he was thinking about something Verisol had said to him 3 hours ago, before the battle started. Something he had dismissed at the time because he had been busy and confident and certain. She had said, quietly and without drama, that the intelligence files on humanity were incomplete, that the collective had been measuring the wrong things. He understood now what she had meant. "What do you want from this conversation?" he asked. "I want you to send an honest report to the Grand Council," Holt said. "Tell them what you saw. Tell them what this ship did and what it didn't do. Tell them that we disabled 63 of your vessels and killed nobody. Tell them that 6 more ships are sitting next to their home planets right now, and that those ships have been there for 9 days and have done nothing, because we did not want to hurt anyone." He leaned forward slightly. "And then ask them whether a civilization that went to all of that trouble to avoid killing people sounds like a civilization that wants a war." Soroth Vel looked at the display. 63 dark ships, 137 that had stopped firing on their own because they understood that firing was useless. The pale sovereign, sitting in the center of everything, unhurt, unhurried, waiting with the patience of something that has nothing to prove. "You said earlier," Soroth Vel began slowly, "that you refuse to lose. What does that mean exactly for a civilization like yours?" Holt thought about it for a moment. "It means we will always find a way," he said. "Not necessarily the way you expect. Not necessarily the way that makes sense to you. We don't always win cleanly. We don't always win quickly. But we adapt. We keep going long after the point where it would be reasonable to stop." Something shifted in his expression. Not harder, but more serious, more honest. "The collective has never fought anything like us, Admiral. We are not saying that to threaten you. We are saying it because it is true, and because we think you deserve to know it before you make a decision that cannot be undone." Soroth Vel stood very still for a long time. Then he said, "I will send the report." Holt nodded once. "Thank you, Admiral." The channel stayed open for a moment longer. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that the silence did not already say better. Then Soroth Vel reached out and closed the channel himself. He turned to his aide, who was standing quietly at his side, and he said 4 words in a voice that was very steady and very tired. 6 months passed. The war that was supposed to happen did not happen. There was no great battle. There was no final charge of fleets across the dark between stars. There was no moment of fire and ruin that future generations would name and remember and build monuments to. The Vithara Collective's ultimatum quietly expired, without being answered in the way it had been intended. And the machinery of war that had been set in motion over 2 long years of preparation, slowly, awkwardly, like a very large machine being put into reverse, began to wind down. It was not a clean process. It was not a fast one. Peace between civilizations that have been pointing weapons at each other rarely arrives the way it does in stories. It arrives the way most real things arrive, gradually and imperfectly, full of arguments and misunderstandings, and long meetings in uncomfortable rooms where nobody agrees on anything for a very long time. But it arrived. The first formal diplomatic talks between the Human Union and the Vithara Collective were held on a neutral station in the space between their territories, a place that belonged to neither side and therefore felt safe enough for both. Grand Admiral Alara Voss attended in person. She sat across a long table from 3 senior members of the Collective's Grand Council, and she drank bad coffee and spoke plainly and did not apologize for anything the Pale Sovereign had done, because she had not sent it to do anything that required an apology. The council members had expected someone harder, someone colder, someone who wore victory the way the powerful usually wear it, loudly, with the quiet enjoyment of a person who knows they have won and wants to make sure everyone in the room knows it too. Voss was not like that. She was direct, and she was patient, and when the council members pushed back on certain points, and they did push back, because they were proud, and they had not completely accepted what the situation actually was, she listened to them fully before she responded, and when she responded, she did it without contempt. One of the council members asked her, on the second day of talks, why humanity had not simply used the position of advantage it had spent 2 years building. 6 ships near Vithara homeworlds, the element of surprise, the demonstrated capability of the Pale Sovereign. Why had they not struck? Voss looked at the council member for a moment. Because we didn't want to, she said. We wanted to exist. There is a difference between those 2 things, and we think that difference matters. The council member was quiet for a moment. Then they said, most civilizations in your position would have used that advantage. I know, Voss said. We are aware of that. She picked up her coffee. We've studied most of those civilizations. We know how their stories ended. The talks continued for 11 weeks. In the end, the Outer Reach colonies remained human. The Collective recognized the Human Union's territorial boundaries. Humanity, in turn, removed its 6 sovereign-class vessels from Vithara space, openly, with full notification of their departure. So there would be no doubt and no suspicion about what was happening. It was a gesture, Voss had explained, a way of demonstrating that the ships had never been there as a threat. They had been there as a fact, and facts, once understood, did not need to remain present to continue being true. The talks ended without ceremony. There were no banners, no celebrations, no formal signing event broadcast across both civilizations. There was only a document and 2 sets of signatures, and a long, quiet walk back to separate ships heading in separate directions. Ambassador Verisol, who had attended every session of the talks as the Collective's senior diplomatic observer, stood at the viewport of the neutral station and watched the human delegation's transport depart. She had filed 14 reports over the 6 months since the battle. All of them had said variations of the same thing. All of them had been read. None of them had been ignored. She thought about something Commander Holt had said to her in a brief, informal conversation on the 3rd day of talks, when she had found him standing alone in a corridor drinking coffee at an hour when most people were asleep. She had asked him if he was proud of what the Pale Sovereign had done. He had thought about it genuinely, not the way people think about questions they already have answers to, but the way people think about questions that are actually difficult. I'm glad nobody died, he had said finally, That's the part I feel good about. The rest of it," he had paused, "the rest of it I just feel relieved about, because it could have gone differently." She was still thinking about it. Soroth Vel read alone in his quarters every night. He had requested access to the full archive of human historical records as part of the diplomatic process. It had been offered freely, with no conditions, which had surprised him, and he had been working through them steadily since the talks began. Wars, collapses, near extinctions, recoveries. The long, ugly, complicated story of a species that had never had anyone to help them and had kept going anyway. The records were not flattering. Humanity had done terrible things to itself. It had made catastrophic mistakes, had failed repeatedly and badly, had come to the edge of ending more than once. There was no attempt in the records to hide any of this. The history was presented plainly, the good and the bad and the ugly, given equal space, as if whoever had compiled it believed that honest history was more valuable than comfortable history. Most civilizations, in his experience, wrote histories that made themselves look inevitable, like they had always been heading toward the strength they now had, like the path had been clear and the outcome had always been certain. Human history read like no such thing. It read like a series of accidents and disasters and desperate improvisations that had somehow kept producing a species that was still there on the other side of all of them, still adapting, still going. On the night the diplomatic talks officially concluded, Soroth Vel sat at his desk with the records open in front of him, and he stayed there for a long time without reading anything, just thinking. His aide came in to tell him the news of the agreement's completion, and found him sitting at the viewport instead, watching the stars. "The talks are finished," the aide said. "The council has confirmed ratification." Soroth Vel nodded slowly without turning around. "The Pale Sovereign is departing the station," the aide added. "Escort back to human space. They cleared it with our border command." "I know," Soroth Vel said. "I approve the clearance." They stood in silence for a moment. Through the viewport, at the very edge of visible range, a long, dark shape was moving. Almost featureless, unhurried, carrying its small crew back toward home through the dark between stars. "I've been thinking about something," Soroth Vel said. "Sir?" "We built an empire on certainty," he said quietly. "The certainty that numbers decide wars, that the larger force wins, that a civilization facing 40-to-1 odds does not fight. It surrenders or it dies. 400 years of war taught us that lesson, and we never questioned it." He watched the Pale Sovereign grow smaller in the viewport, and they sent one ship. His aide was quiet for a moment. Did it work? Did it frighten us into peace? Soroth Vel watched the human vessel until it was almost too small to see. His gold eyes were steady and unreadable in the way they always were. But there was something behind them that had not been there 6 months ago. Something that had settled in quietly over weeks of reading and thinking and sitting alone with difficult truths. "No," he said. His voice was calm and certain and sincere. "It made us wise enough to want it." The Pale Sovereign moved beyond the range of the viewport and disappeared into the dark. The stars remained where they had always been, unchanged and indifferent and very, very old. They had watched civilizations rise and burn and vanish into silence. They did not care about ultimatums or battle groups or adaptive shielding or the things that species said to each other in the long, difficult moments when they were deciding what kind of people they wanted to be. But somewhere in the dark, one small ship was heading home. And behind it, where a war had almost been, there was nothing, just space, and the quiet, fragile, imperfect beginning of something better.